One author believes that reopening the housing court in New York is wrong. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's kind of going from an opposing viewpoint of what most landlords think, and it's a more progressive viewpoint talking about, obviously they don't want to reopen the housing courts up in New York, and they're not happy that New York is doing it. But before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below, and let me know what you think of this kind of article, okay? So what do you think of reopening the housing courts? Do you think it's wrong? Well, you probably already know what I think. So this article, it comes from NewYorkDailyNews.com, and it says, reopening housing court is wrong. And it's an opinion article, so get ready for some interesting opinions. After a brief reprieve at the beginning of the summer, the Delta variant of COVID-19 has led to an increase in COVID-19 cases in New York City, with the current positivity rate hovering around 4%. The Centers for Disease Control has confirmed that the Delta variant is far more infectious and transmissible than previous versions of the virus. There still remains no end in sight to this pandemic, a stark reality that is particularly felt by this city's low-income brown and black residents who have been dying from COVID-19 at disproportionately higher rates. Thankfully, Governor Hochul signed a new statewide eviction moratorium earlier this month after the U.S. Supreme Court gutted both the previous New York State eviction moratorium and the Biden administration's federal eviction ban. Now, New Yorkers who have experienced financial or physical hardships cannot be forced out of their homes until January of next year, averting a homelessness crisis of unimaginable proportions. Now, I'm not convinced that the previous eviction moratoriums, either in New York State or the federal one, actually were preventing homelessness, okay? My thought is that the majority of the people who weren't paying would have found other housing if they had, been forced to leave their homes, okay? They wouldn't have immediately ended up on the street. They would have moved in with relatives. They would have found places that they could actually afford, or, even the ones who were out of a job, they might have gone back to work realizing that, hey, I got to find some place to live, so I got to actually go back to work. But they had no motivation to go back to work because they were telling them, hey, you don't have to pay rent, and we're going to give you all of these extended unemployment benefits, stimulus checks, child tax credit, etc., to stay home. So what was the point, So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things here that, really screwed landlords over during these eviction moratoriums. And I don't like when they bring up, the pandemic. Oh, the pandemic is getting worse again. Well, at this point, right, we're more than a year and a half beyond the beginning of when all of this started. So how long do you think landlords should be expected to keep tenants in their properties? And for an author like this, my guess is they want landlords to keep, these non-paying tenants in their properties forever. Despite the emergency measures to lessen the impact of the pandemic on New York's most vulnerable residents, New York State's Office of Court Administration and Chief Judge Janet DeFiore are moving forward with a haphazard plan requiring tenants and attorneys to return to housing court in person beginning September 21st. As housing attorneys who represent low-income New York City tenants whose landlords are attempting to evict them, we are deeply alarmed by OCA's move to pack tenants into notoriously crowded housing court buildings at a time when COVID-19 cases and hospitalizations in New York City are increasing. So now they're saying, oh, it's too dangerous for us to go into these buildings and go to housing court. Well, there's a ton of other buildings that are more crowded than housing court that are already open. Okay, not only that, but New York City has a very high vaccination rate. So, if you, and I believe they have a mask mandate too. So they've been telling us for a while that these vaccines and the masks will protect you. And so why are you so afraid? Why are you so afraid all of a sudden? You're just, being ridiculous at this point. Okay, you're making up excuses. You're trying to use the pandemic as an excuse to keep these courts shut down. Now, there's a lot of people who are not protected by the new New York State eviction moratorium. They have no right to be in these properties, and they need to be removed. Okay, we're talking about people such as, people who are causing a danger or an extreme nuisance to other tenants of the same buildings, and people who need to be removed for reasons other than non-payment of rent due to the pandemic. So what protections do they need? Yet you're telling landlords, well, the housing court isn't even open, so you can't even remove these people. That's completely wrong, okay? You have to have the court open regardless of whether you can remove these other people or not. How else can landlords even, fight their cases, okay? Not only that, but it's creating this huge backlog, and the backlog could take years to get through if there's just this huge backlog of cases. So, it's completely wrong to have these courts shut down. Since the state's eviction moratorium allows landlords to challenge whether a tenant has experienced COVID-related financial or physical hardship and thus be protected from eviction, the number of eviction cases we will see in the coming weeks will explode as landlords do all that they can to argue to the court that their tenants aren't covered under the statewide moratorium. This will have devastating consequences for low-income New Yorkers of color who have been bearing the brunt of the pandemic and are the same groups that are at the highest risk of being evicted, losing their homes and being displaced. And that's a common tactic I like to read about from the progressives too. They're always like, oh, this will affect the people of color. Well, listen, okay? You always use that as an excuse for why we can't do anything because that is a ridiculous argument. It is a ridiculous argument. I'm saying it, okay? I'm a black man. I can say it. I can say that it's a ridiculous argument. People need to pay their bills regardless of what color they are, okay? People still need to go through the eviction process. And in New York, there are probably more minority landlords than there are anywhere else in the entire country, okay? I am a black landlord, okay? So when you are trying to protect one group and then you end up hurting that group, people like me who are landlords just trying to make a living by passing these rules and trying to use racism as an excuse. Before New York City shut down in spring of 2020, courthouses were places where COVID-19 spread quickly and where many judges, court staff, tenant litigants, and attorneys became sick and died. Last September, an independent health and safety team found in several courthouses due to the physical layout, there are no articulated plans to keep the public safe once they enter the courthouse. In these courthouses, entering the courthouses poses an unacceptably high risk of acquiring SARS-CoV-2 due to the number of people who congregate in close proximity when forming lines and the lack of dedicated, sufficiently ventilated space to wait for courtroom appearances. And guess what? None of that even matters anymore. You're talking about spring of 2020? So much has changed. We've learned so much about this pandemic since then, and you're completely ignoring that so that you can make an argument. That is a dumb argument, okay? So now we can set up social distancing. We can limit the number of people who come into the courthouse at one time. We can have everybody on the inside wearing masks. The grand majority of people on the inside are going to be vaccinated. Okay, all of your arguments are void because of all of the information that we've learned since the beginning of this pandemic. Okay, this isn't the same thing that was going on back in March of 2020. This is completely different, and this argument doesn't make any sense. For that reason, since March 2020, housing court operations have been mostly virtual. Tenants connect with an attorney when their cases are first heard by a judge, either through video conference or by calling into court. Tenants and attorneys have not been required to make in-person court appearances, except in specific circumstances when their case necessitates it. This virtual intake has saved hundreds of people from being forced to enter the cramped, often windowless, poorly ventilated courtrooms, conditions which we know increase the blah, 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 whatever. I'm going to skip to the next paragraph. The sudden and reckless push to mandate in-person court appearances has no tangible relationship to any need of the litigants or their counsel. Today, we can safely contact families before their court dates, have confidential phone conversations, and better assist people in securing their housing rights without risking COVID-19 transmission. Tenants are also able to safely call in to their hearings and connect to their legal representation without risking their health in the crowded halls of housing court. Ridiculous, okay? Ridiculous. Everything else is opening back up, and you're telling me that only the housing court is too dangerous, okay? You've got sports events going on, you got concerts going on, you got restaurants open, and you're telling me that only the housing court is too dangerous. You're being ridiculous. Okay, this whole article is ridiculous, obviously, but what they're trying to do is they're trying to impede the process so that landlords are unable to evict any tenants. That's it. These people who wrote this article, they're lawyers. Okay, they're tenant rights lawyers, and they're trying to impede the process so that landlords won't be able to go through any evictions. They would like to stop all evictions. They would like landlords to pay for tenants to stay in their properties for free indefinitely. So, yeah, complete joke of an article. I thought I would throw that in there, but, you already knew my opinion when I first, read the title of the article. So, it's a crazy situation going up in New York. I'm glad that this is only an opinion article and this isn't actually what, people are going to be doing.